In the summer of 1099, after 3 years of fire, famine, and endless marching, a ragged army finally stood before the walls of Jerusalem. What happened next was not just a siege. It was a moment when faith itself turned into fire and blood. This is the story of the First Crusade's brutal climax, the Siege of Jerusalem. At dawn on a burning July morning in the year 1099, a cloud of dust rose above the hills of Judea. Below it, tens of thousands of gaunt, sunburned men came into view. Their armor was dented, their clothes ragged, their bodies thin from hunger and thirst. And yet, their eyes burned with something fierce, the vision of the holy city, Jerusalem. After 3 brutal years of marching through deserts, mountains, and enemy armies, the Crusaders had finally arrived. Before them lay the city of God, the goal for which they had endured unthinkable suffering. But between them and that dream stood towering walls, determined defenders, and a people who would fight to the death to keep them out. This would not be a pilgrimage. It would be a reckoning. To understand the fury of that summer, we must go back to the call that began it all. In 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd in France and declared that Christians must liberate the Holy Land from Muslim control. His fiery words spread across Europe, igniting a movement unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Kings, knights, peasants, even children, tens of thousands took up the cross, sewing its symbol onto their tunics. They marched east with one cry on their lips: Deus vult, God wills it. But God's will was a hard road. The journey devoured armies. Some perished in Anatolia, ambushed by Turks. Others starved crossing barren plains. At Antioch, they nearly broke under siege and starvation, eating roots, leather, even the bodies of the dead. By the time they reached Jerusalem, their numbers had withered. Perhaps 15,000 remained, a fraction of the original host. Yet these survivors were hardened by fire, convinced that every step had been guided by divine purpose. And so, when the holy city rose before them on the horizon, shimmering in the desert heat, they fell to their knees and wept. For some, it was joy. For others, terror. For all, it was destiny. Jerusalem was no ordinary city. It was the sacred heart of 3 faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But in the summer of 1099, it was firmly in the hands of the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt. The Fatimid governor had prepared well. The surrounding countryside was stripped bare, wells poisoned, crops destroyed. Within the walls stood perhaps 10 to 15,000 defenders, Egyptian soldiers, Arab fighters, and local inhabitants ready to resist. The Crusaders, starving and desperate, found themselves in a nightmare. The heat was merciless. Water was scarce. Men collapsed in the dust, their tongues swollen, their skin blistered by the sun. Some knights sold their armor for a handful of dates. Others drank water mixed with animal blood just to survive. And yet, amid the suffering, faith grew stronger. Chroniclers tell us the Crusaders walked barefoot around the walls in solemn procession, chanting psalms, begging for God's favor. A priest preached that the city would fall within 9 days, if only they believed. Faith had carried them this far. Faith would have to carry them further still. The Crusaders built siege engines from whatever they could find. Timber was hauled from Samaria, even from dismantled ships dragged overland from Jaffa. Sweat and blood went into the great towers that now loomed against the city walls. On July 13th, the first assault began. The Crusaders rolled their towers forward under a hail of arrows, stones, and boiling oil. Defenders hurled flaming torches, Greek fire, anything to burn the machines. The assault was chaos, men screaming, ladders crashing, shields splintering. Twice the Crusaders breached the outer defenses, and twice they were driven back. By nightfall, the ground was littered with the dead. Many believed it was over. They had come so far, only to fail at the very gates of Jerusalem. But then something shifted. A priest claimed to have seen a vision of the ghostly warrior Bishop Ademar, commanding them to fast, to pray, and to march barefoot around the city once more. Whether divine or not, the act restored morale. Meanwhile, Godfrey of Bouillon, one of the Crusade's most respected leaders, ordered a massive siege tower rebuilt, larger, stronger, and rolled under cover of darkness to a weaker section of the northern wall. On July 15th, the final assault began. The morning sun rose red, casting long shadows over the walls of Jerusalem. Trumpets sounded, drums thundered, and then the earth shook as the siege tower rolled forward. Defenders rained arrows and stones upon it, but the Crusaders pushed on, shields locked, their cries echoing across the plain. Godfrey himself climbed the tower, directing archers to clear the walls. And then a miracle or a horror, depending on which side you stood. A Crusader's plank crashed down, bridging the tower to the wall. With a roar, the knights surged across. The defense crumbled. Panic swept the city. And once the Crusaders broke through, the fury of 3 years of suffering erupted in a storm of blood. What followed was slaughter. Chroniclers wrote of rivers of blood flowing through the streets, of corpses piled in doorways. Men, women, children, Muslim, Jew, even some Eastern Christians, cut down without mercy. The Dome of the Rock was seized and consecrated as a Christian church. The Al-Aqsa Mosque became the palace of the conquerors. In the Holy Sepulchre, Crusaders knelt weeping, singing hymns of triumph, their swords still wet with blood. For the victors, it was divine justice. For the victims, it was apocalypse. And for history, it was both. Out of the ashes of Jerusalem rose the kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile Crusader state that would stand for less than a century before being swept away. But the memory of 1099 would endure. In Europe, it was celebrated as the greatest triumph of Christian arms. In the Islamic world, it became a scar, remembered for centuries as the day faith's promise became faith's betrayal. The siege of Jerusalem was not just a battle. It was a revelation of humanity's capacity for endurance and for atrocity, of faith's power to inspire and to destroy. Picture it one last time. Gaunt men in battered armor kneeling at the tomb of Christ, their voices rising in hymns, while just outside the church the streets ran red. The siege of Jerusalem reminds us that history is rarely simple. It is glory and horror, faith and fire, salvation and slaughter, all entwined. And that is why, nearly 1,000 years later, the summer of 1099 still speaks to us, not as a distant story, but as a mirror. A mirror of what we believe and what we are capable of doing in the name of that belief. If you've been captivated by this journey into one of history's most dramatic sieges, don't let the story end here. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with others who love history brought to life. Many more battles, empires, and turning points await, because history is not just the past, it is the fire that still burns in us today.